we're going to go ahead and get into the next section here. When I originally designed this class, I did anticipate a smaller group and thought we'd have more dialogue back and forth. What I'm going to do is do the second section now, and then after that, we will open it up for questions that you might have, if that's okay. So what we did is the first section was just laying the baseline, unity. We good with that? We understand Jesus is all about it. We got to strive for it. It can get us in trouble if we're not really going after unity. The second thing I want us to talk about is really our hearts. And not our hearts, but actually the ones that are in disunity, the ones that need reconciliation. I know a lot of us in the room, when you heard that, there's going to be some teaching on conflict resolution. You're ready for the PowerPoint. You're ready for the program, the 5 things to do. We've got it kind of in our minds, right? And I'm sure it's true here in India, but in the United States, there's a lot of television programs and series that revolve around the courtroom scene, right? And so you always have this big battle in the courtroom and the judge is up there and the jury and all that kind of stuff. And I think in our minds, we think that's what I want to learn how to do as far as conflict resolution. We're going to get 2 sides in the room, and maybe they've got some people on each side, and then we're going to get some really respected leaders in the church in there, and then finally we'll go back and forth, and whoever presents the best case will decide, and then it's all resolved, we're good. It's not going to work that way. It's not a courtroom scene. The problem with that approach is it tends to rely on those that can argue the best, or give the best presentation, or outlast the other side, or have more people on their side than the other side. And what you miss is you don't ever really get down to the heart. If we're going to deal with issues regarding conflict, we've got to get serious about really what's going on inside of the person. But before we even do that, I've got a question for you as the leaders. You've got to approach situations where there is conflict and be prepared, as Kim just talked about, to hear what the other side is and weigh it out. If you are taking on a conflict and hope to resolve it, but you've already made up your mind ahead of time who's right and who's wrong, they're going to suss you out 5 minutes into the discussion. Your body language, your questions, your attitude, who's with you, who you agree with, who you don't. All of it's going to come out. You've got to really have the maturity to say, I want to hear both sides. I want to learn about this situation so we can make a godly and righteous decision. Amen? This is hard work. This is painful work. And many times in the church, we are dealing with situations that are tearing people and sometimes families apart. In our 2 nights together, I'm going to share some situations without mentioning names or even churches, okay? And I'm going to ask you to not then try to figure out which names or churches I'm talking about, because that's not the point of this. But there are situations that I've had to work through and other brothers and sisters have had to work through that have been incredibly difficult, but really have pointed towards the need to get to the heart of where people are at on the inside rather than who's right and who's wrong. We had a situation far, far away. But it's a very sad situation. It took place a long time ago, but there were 2 families in the same church raising teenage children, and there was molestation that took place between one family that had a son and the other family that had a daughter. And the situation was tragic, and it was brought to the attention of the leadership, and things were talked out, and it seemed to have been resolved when they were young teens. Except the daughter continued to wrestle with what had happened. And it led to her having emotional difficulties and a lot of other issues that came into her life, and it was very tough on the family. As it turned out, families that were both in the same church then ended up being in different churches and pretty far removed from each other. But there was a lot of feelings and there was feelings towards one family towards another. And the whole thing kind of came to a head, and it got down to the fact that the family with the daughter was still feeling like the family that had the son was not taking enough responsibility. The family that had the son had then grown up, and he'd actually moved away from the family and had actually left the church. And so this family felt unjustly accused. They don't even have control over the situation anymore. Their son is gone. Why are you so upset with us? And it went back and forth, and it was getting so elevated. And there was so much hurt, and other families were being drawn in, and now it's two different churches that are being drawn in. But what really needed to take place was for the family that had the son to begin to identify and have empathy for what the family that had the daughter was actually going through. And when we got the family that had the son to stop being on the defensive, but to really get in touch with the heart of the matter and what was going on, the situation changed. And I'm happy to say the resolution was that there was complete forgiveness. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of openness and detailed explanation about pain. But that all needed to happen. It wasn't who could argue their case the best. It wasn't who had more people on their side. It was really the need to get down to where people were at on the inside and where their heart was. This happened not far from where we live in Philadelphia. But on October 2nd, 2006, a shooting occurred at the West Nickel Mine School, an Amish one-room schoolhouse on the Old Order Amish community in the nickel mines village of the Bart Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. A gunman, Charles Carl Robert IV, took hostages and shot 10 girls, killing 5, before committing suicide in the schoolhouse. In the midst of their grief over the shocking loss, the Amish community didn't cast blame. They didn't point fingers. They didn't hold a press conference with attorneys at their side. Instead, they reached out with grace and compassion towards the killer's family. The afternoon of the shooting, an Amish grandfather, one of the girls who was killed, expressed forgiveness towards the killer, Charles Robert. That same day, the Amish neighbors visited the Roberts family to comfort them in their sorrow and their pain. Later that week, the Roberts family was invited to the funeral of one of the Amish girls who had been killed. An Amish mourner outnumbered the non-Amish at Charles Roberts' funeral. It's ironic that the killer was tormented for 9 years by the premature death of his young daughter. He never forgave God for her death. Yet, after he cold-bloodedly shot 10 innocent Amish schoolgirls, the Amish almost immediately forgave him and showed compassion towards his family. These sort of stories shock the world. But it should be us, God's people, that really identify and say, yes, we've got to get to the inside, to the heart, to where people are really hurting, instead of just casting blame. Instead of just gathering groups together that get too worked up about all the things on the outside. We need to get to the heart. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, you can just write down the reference. But it says that we are to bear and forgive one another. In Ephesians 4, verses 31 and 32, it talks about getting rid of all bitterness. And then, of course, in Matthew 18, verses 23 through 35, we've got the story of the unmerciful servant. And the end of that story, it says, this is how the Father will treat each of you unless you forgive, and it says, from your heart. How many parents in the room? Raise your hand. All right, a lot of you. You remember when those dear, sweet kids of ours were 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6, and we're teaching them how to say sorry. And so they've done something wrong. They hit their brother or sister. They stole a biscuit from the cookie jar or whatever, and they've messed up. And so we're trying to teach them to say sorry. And so they kind of, wiggle around a little bit and don't really want to do it, but finally, maybe it's to the brother or sister, they say sorry. And then we let it go. That's okay when they're 4 or 5, 6 years old. They're just learning. But sometimes in the church, that's all that we expect. Okay, look at each other, say sorry, give your brother a hug, Okay, we're done, right? Let's move on. When we haven't really gotten down to what's on the inside, when we haven't really gotten down to the heart of the matter. Once again, forgiveness is a salvation issue. Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. If you do not forgive men, God won't forgive you. I hate to say it, but that sounds awful conditional on God's part, doesn't it? God's saying, if you don't forgive, then I'm not going to forgive you. Is God being harsh? Is he being a stickler? No, he realizes that a lack of forgiveness is sin. And sin separates us from God, and God just can't ignore sin. And so if there's sin standing between us and God, he can't forget. We've got to make the next move. It's up to us. And so once again, this forgiveness issue, this getting into the real heart of the issue is crucial, it's essential, and we need to make sure that we stay on it. Sometimes Hollywood, maybe Bollywood, I don't know, likes to get us wrapped up in such extreme situations that we feel like it's okay to hate the bad guy. Right? Hollywood's great at concocting a villain that is so evil and so wicked. And he's killing everybody and he's just awful. And so it's almost like we're cheering, blow him up, chop him to bits. He doesn't deserve to live, And we've just kind of gotten into this sort of mob mentality of it's okay because the sin is so egregious. The bad thing is so awful that it's okay to not forgive. It's never not okay. It's never not okay to forgive. Did I say that right? We need to forgive. No matter what. That's what God says. Jesus went to the cross saying, forgive them. And we've got to make sure as we lead our brothers and sisters that we are moving them towards understanding what true biblical forgiveness is. So once again, I'm going to have Kim come up and share a few things.
I just think along with what Walter's saying, forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person being sorry. So if we're going to go to a brother or sister and we're going to bring up something, or a family member or a neighbor, whoever it is, one of the things I tell women when I'm talking to them, I said, okay, if they don't listen one bit to what you're going to say, how are you going to do with that? I write stories in my head that if I say it just right, they're going to listen to me and they're going to go, thank you so much, and I'm so sorry. And we're going to embrace, and once again, because I was right to start with, and then I'm going to go home. And it generally doesn't go that way. But if my heart isn't dependent on their response, my conversations go so much better. Stephen Covey, one of his sayings is, seek first to understand and then to be understood. It sounds a lot like the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But if we will go and try to understand the other side, and then say, you know what, this really bothered me, or I was hurt. If they're sorry or not, it's okay. It doesn't make any difference. I can go away. Now, I always think about Jesus hanging on the cross. Can you even imagine hanging on the cross and him looking down and saying, forgive them, they know not what they do. But the other thing that amazes me is when he rose from the dead. When I saw my friends and the disciples, if I rose from the dead, I would be like, you really hurt my feelings. He doesn't go there. He doesn't even bring it up because he forgave them. He didn't need to. That's tough. You know?
Amen. Okay. Thank you, Kim. So, tonight we've kind of laid some groundwork. We've talked about the importance of unity. We've got to fight for unity. We've got to really see that as our baseline no matter what. And then we've also seen that we're not just trying to win a court case. We're not just trying to convince or out-argue. We want to really get to the heart of where people are at. Tomorrow night, we're going to get into the practicals. Okay, how do you actually resolve conflict? What do you do with two people or even two groups that are going at it with each other? Okay? We can wrap it up with that tonight. Tomorrow, we will talk about the practical application of conflict resolution. Thank you very much.